So, Eliza, thanks for joining us. You're joining us from Italy, is that right? Taking a rare vacation?
It is. What a week to be away, huh?
For sure. So what's it been like for you to follow this case as there's the anticipation? Let's start with the anticipation. What was your guess that the prosecutor Bragg was going to bring forward, and did what he actually brought forward kind of match with what you expected?
Well, I mean, if you think back to when he took office and Pomerantz and Dunn very loudly quit that office because Alvin wasn't pursuing the Trump prosecution, I think if we're rewinding that far back, our anticipation, a lot of us, and myself included, was that Trump might not be prosecuting Donald Trump at all. So that was interesting. And then when it seemed as though he was starting to bring in witnesses, it really did seem as though this was all going to stem from the Stormy Daniels hush money payments by Michael Cohen. And so it was surprising to see the Karen McDougal and Doorman incidents included within the falsifying business records in the first degree indictment.
Remind us about that, because that's sort of in memory hold a little bit. But I remember that incident. That some of the top prosecutors said this guy's just not serious about going after Trump, so we're out of here. So were they wrong, or did he change his mind, or did their quitting kind of pressure him? What's the sense among kind of the lawyer or legal community in Manhattan about how you went from that moment to the moment that we saw this week?
Well, I think people who know Mark Pomerantz and what he did, it was pretty clear how sanctimonious and obnoxious and frankly racist he was being in his criticisms of Alvin. And he decided that if he didn't get to run the show, if anyone was going to have any oversight into what he was doing, especially a Black man, he was not going to stand by and take that. And then he basically decided to do this self-promotional book tour, jeopardizing the investigation. And now he's facing the repercussions of that, in that he was just subpoenaed, I believe, and is going to have to deal with that. But I think that Alvin was always very serious about this, but he took the case very seriously and he wasn't going to rush into it. And I think that we may never know what exactly had gone on prior to his taking office in terms of when Cy Vance was in charge, but it doesn't seem as though the prosecution was seriously going to go forward until Alvin took office. And so I think Alvin took his time, was measured and careful, and really considered which charges he would be able to bring and prove beyond a reasonable doubt. And that is why we're seeing the indictment that we see.
What do you make of how Bragg has sort of led all of this, or like as the leader of his office and as somebody who was looking into this office, who ran for this office? What do you make of how he's conducted himself as a leader over the course of the last, I don't know, not just several days, but several weeks, several months? Do you think he's handled all of this well? Do you think, there were do you think there were any blunders along the way? Like if you had to grade him in terms of the Trump indictment, where would you land?
Well, if we're only talking about the Trump indictment, that I think remains to be seen. But I think he made some massive blunders in taking office and certainly has not run that office in the way that I would have. I think that the fact that he did not clean house at all, that the only people who left that office are people who up and quit, and he did not fire a single person, means that if he even was serious about making real changes, he's had a really uphill battle in doing so, given that the entire administration has basically remained the same as it was under Cy Vance. So I have a lot of gripes with how Alvin is running that office, but not necessarily with regards to the Trump administration the Trump prosecution.
Mm-hmm. The Trump indictment has come in for a lot of criticism from people who say that the attempt to raise it from a misdemeanor into a felony by saying that it's in furtherance of an additional crime runs into all sorts of problems. One of them being that one of the crimes is an FEC violation, which wasn't actually charged. The other that it might not be even in the federal jurisdiction. And for people who really wanted to see Trump, hit with something that was a slam dunk, is this really the best that could have been done? Was Was there more criminal behavior from that could have been charged as you were running for office and you were contemplating, like, okay, how would I set up a prosecution? What kind of holes do you think you would have dug that might have been left here?
Well, the interesting thing about bringing forward a prosecution is that you're the person who has all of the evidence. So even when being asked about it while campaigning, I could say, listen, if I believe Trump committed crimes in Manhattan, I will prosecute him. I will not be afraid to go after him despite his power and everything else. But I don't think that anyone aside from the people within that office know what the exact evidence is at this point. So I think that, are there other crimes that were committed? I don't know. Maybe, but these are clearly the ones that Alvin feels are the strongest to go forward on. And I don't think that he would have gone forward on these charges if he didn't feel he had a very strong case because of how thoughtful and measured and cautious he is as a person. I think that in terms of whether or not there are some of these legal arguments that are being made by attorneys who've never practiced in New York State or who feel like weighing in on this, saying that, oh, well, some of the underlying crimes might be federal. He might have, the preemption doctrine might apply. That is not at all clear to me. I think that, first of all, Alvin hasn't had to, nor has he said exactly what those underlying crimes are. Could they be New York State tax offenses? Yes. Could they be state election law violations? Yes. Could they be federal campaign finance violations? Also, yes. And I don't think that there will be any issue, having heard some of the arguments on the other side, that those are valid underlying crimes to go forward on. Again, this will be up to a jury. This will be a question of fact for a jury to determine. And if the jurors feel that the misdemeanor conduct was proven, but the underlying crime wasn't, they could still convict on what's called a lesser included offense. And so they could convict on the misdemeanor, even though the top charges are felonies.
The big thing that we've heard from the right, and Emily might have more thoughts on this, has been around the George Soros-backed prosecutor. But I want to unpack that a little bit because as you remember, I covered this campaign as well, and I do remember when the Color of Change PAC that's the organization. I think it spent about $4 million in the entire year, and about $1 million of that was from Soros. They did eventually endorse Alvin Bragg. They did spend on his behalf. So as an opponent of him, what was your sense of A, kind of how important was the Color of Change PAC, and B, did people understand that as, oh, this is the Soros kind of world getting behind him, or was this Color of Change, which had some Soros money? Mm.
So if I remember correctly, all of that kind of happened at once. It was the New York Times endorsement, the Color of Change endorsement, which was going to include that PAC spending and a couple of other things that fell in Alvin's favor. And it felt like a domino effect. So it's hard to say that there was any one thing that really determined the course of the election. But I think that in that moment, when all of that perfect storm of endorsements came raining down, and therefore a ton of spending along with it, that it certainly helped Alvin get elected. But I don't really remember people saying, oh, this is Soros money. I think it was more, okay, he got the Color of Change endorsement and the New York Times endorsement and all these other things simultaneously. And I think that most of the attacks calling him this Soros-backed prosecutor are frankly anti-Semitism, and we should disregard them as just completely disingenuous.
So you have an op-ed out in the Daily Beast this week called Stopping Trump from Running for Office Again is Bad for Democracy. Could you just sort of flesh out the argument you make? We've actually already touched on some of the points, but could you flesh out some of the points that you make in this really interesting piece?
Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I did not choose the headline, although it is something that I said in the piece. Basically, I heard, I think on MSNBC this week, people saying, oh, well, if he's convicted of a felony, we should bar him from running for president. It should be a bar. This is a bar on voting in many states. It should be a bar on running for office. And that led me to kind of just shooting off a tweet saying that this would be bad for democracy, that because of the way the criminal legal system operates, the way that it disenfranchises and marginalizes, people of color, low-income folks, other marginalized groups. If we are to bar those people from running for office, preventing people with felony convictions, it would be very bad for democracy. It would be something that would be problematic. It would be, weaponizing something that is not that's not good. And so, yes, a lot of people are salivating at this over, the idea that it would apply to Trump. But the reality is, we should be evaluating candidates based on their bios, their backgrounds, their histories, and individual voters should do that. And if they're convicted of a felony and that makes someone not want to vote for them, then that's fine. But due to the way our criminal legal system disproportionately disenfranchises and stigmatizes people of color and poor, vulnerable people, we should not be pushing for this as a overarching thing.
If you had to put a number on it, what would you say? What portion of the campaign was about Trump and holding Trump accountable, and what portion of it was about local issues, local to Manhattan voters?
Oh, gosh. I would say Trump came up in most of our forums or debates. It was certainly an issue that was brought up time and time again. There were pieces about what each of us had said with regards to a Trump prosecution. And so maybe I would say it encompassed 20% or less. I mean, I think the majority of the campaign was still about local issues, about bail, about criminal justice, about public safety, about other things that the DA's office would do. But I do think Trump was a huge factor.
How do you feel watching this unfold? What's your portion of FOMO, and what's your portion of man, I'm glad I'm not in the middle of this?
It's funny. I've had a lot of people reach out to me saying, hey, selfishly, I am glad that you're not the person doing this, because you would be the one getting these death threats. You would be the one whose family would be being put on blast, whose life would potentially be in danger from all of these people who are so angry about this prosecution. But that's not all how I feel. I certainly still very much wish that I were the person running the Manhattan DA's office. And yes, with regards to this one prosecution, but mostly with regards to how that office is still destroying families, ruining lives, especially the lives of my clients. And so I see on a daily basis the ways in which my clients are hurt by that office, the way their prosecutions are still more of the same. And in many ways, Alvin is Cy-Vance 2.0. And so I very much regret not having won that election. All
right, Cy-Vance 2.0, but prosecuted Trump. That seems to be kind of the distinction that we're working with here. Well, Eliza Orlins, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Hey guys, ready or not, 2024 is fully upon us now, and Sagar and I have been brainstorming ways that we can really up our game for this critical election.
Yeah, we rely on our premium subs to expand our coverage, to add staff, to upgrade the studio. We just want to give you the best independent coverage of this election, which is possible. So if you can help us out, become a premium subscriber today, breakingpoints.com, or the link is down here in the description video. It really means the world to us, and if you like what we're all about, this is the best possible way to keep us 100% independent, working only for you.